Chapter 12. It must have been close on to 1 o'clock when we got below the island at last, and the raft did seem to go mighty slow. If a boat was to come along, we was going to take to the canoe and break for the Illinois shore. And it was well a boat didn't come, for we hadn't ever thought to put the gun in the canoe, or a fishing line, or anything to eat. We was in ruther too much of a sweat to think of so many things. It warn't good judgment to put everything on the raft. If the men went to the island, I just expect they found the campfire I built and watched it all night for Jim to come. Anyways, they stayed away from us, and if my building the fire never fooled them, it warn't no fault of mine. I played it as low down on them as I could. When the first streak of day began to show, we tied up to a towhead in a big bend on the Illinois side, and hacked off cottonwood branches with the hatchet, and covered up the raft with them so she looked like there had been a cave-in the bank there. A towhead is a sandbar that has cottonwoods on it as thick as harrow teeth. We had mountains on the Missouri shore and heavy timber on the Illinois side, and the channel was down the Missouri shore at that place, so we weren't afraid of anybody running across us. We laid there all day and watched the rafts and steamboats spin down the Missouri shore, and upbound steamboats fight the big river in the middle. I told Jim all about the time I had jabbering with that woman, and Jim said she was a smart one, and if she was to start after us herself, she wouldn't set down and watch a campfire. No, sir, she'd fetch a dog. Well then, I said, why couldn't she tell her husband to fetch a dog? Jim said he bet she did think of it by the time the men was ready to start, and he believed they must 'a' gone uptown to get a dog, and so they lost all that time. Or else we wouldn't be here on a towhead 16 or 17 mile below the village. No, indeedy, we would be in that same old town again. So I said I didn't care what was the reason they didn't get us, as long as they didn't. When it was beginning to come on dark, we poked our heads out of the cottonwood thicket and looked up and down and across. Nothing in sight. So Jim took up some of the top planks of the raft and built a snug wigwam to get under in blazing weather and rainy, and to keep the things dry. Jim made a floor for the wigwam and raised it a foot or more above the level of the raft, so now the blankets and all the traps was out of reach of steamboat waves. Right in the middle of the wigwam, we made a layer of dirt about 5 or 6 inches deep with a frame around it for to hold it to its place. This was to build a fire on in sloppy weather or chilly. The wigwam would keep it from being seen. We made an extra steering oar, too, because one of the others might get broke on a snag or something. We fixed up a short forked stick to hang the old lantern on, because we must always light the lantern whenever we see a steamboat coming downstream, to keep from getting run over. But we wouldn't have to light it for upstream boats unless we see we was in what they call a crossing. For the river was pretty high yet, very low banks being still a little underwater. So upbound boats didn't always run the channel, but hunted easy water. This second night we run between 7 and 8 hours, with a current that was making over 4 mile an hour. We catched fish and talked, and we took a swim now and then to keep off sleepiness. It was kind of solemn, drifting down the big, still river, laying on our backs looking up at the stars, and we didn't ever feel like talking loud, and it warn't often that we laughed, only a little kind of a low chuckle. We had mighty good weather as a general thing, and nothing ever happened to us at all. That night, nor the next, nor the next. Every night we passed towns, some of them away up on black hillsides, nothing but just a shiny bed of lights, not a house could you see. The fifth night we passed St. Louis, and it was like the whole world lit up. In St. Petersburg, they used to say there was 20 or 30,000 people in St. Louis. But I never believed it till I see that wonderful spread of lights at 2 o'clock that still night. There weren't a sound there. Everybody was asleep. Every night now, I used to slip ashore towards 10 o'clock at some little village and buy 10 or 15 cents worth of meal or bacon or other stuff to eat. And sometimes I lifted a chicken that weren't roosting comfortable and took him along. Pap always said, take a chicken when you get a chance, because if you don't want him yourself, you can easy find somebody that does, and a good deed ain't ever forgot. I never see Pap when he didn't want the chicken himself, but that is what he used to say anyway. Mornings before daylight, I slipped into cornfields and borrowed a watermelon, or a mushmelon, or a pumpkin, or some new corn, or things of that kind. Pap always said it warn't no harm to borrow things if you was meaning to pay them back some time. But the widow said it warn't anything but a soft name for stealing, and no decent body would do it. Jim said he reckoned the widow was partly right and Pap was partly right. So the best way would be for us to pick out 2 or 3 things from the list and say we wouldn't borrow them anymore. Then he reckoned it wouldn't be no harm to borrow the others. So we talked it over all one night, drifting along down the river, trying to make up our minds whether to drop the watermelons or the cantaloupes or the mushmelons, or what. But towards daylight we got it all settled satisfactory, and concluded to drop crabapples and persimmons. We weren't feeling just right before that, but it was all comfortable now. I was glad the way it come out, too, because crabapples ain't ever good, and the persimmons wouldn't be ripe for 2 or 3 months yet. We shot a waterfowl, now and then that got up too early in the morning or didn't go to bed early enough in the evening. Take it all round, we lived pretty high. The 5th night below St. Louis, we had a big storm after midnight, with a power of thunder and lightning, and the rain poured down in a solid sheet. We stayed in the wigwam and let the raft take care of itself. When the lightning glared out, we could see a big straight river ahead and high, rocky bluffs on both sides. By and by, says I, "Hello, Jim, looky yonder." It was a steamboat that had killed herself on a rock. We was drifting straight down for her. The lightning showed her very distinct. She was leaning over, with part of her upper deck above water, and you could see every little chimblig clean and clear, and a chair by the big bell with an old slouch hat hanging on the back of it when the flashes come. Well, it being away in the night and stormy, and all so mysterious-like, I felt just the way any other boy would have felt when I see that wreck laying there so mournful and lonesome in the middle of the river. I wanted to get aboard of her and slink around a little and see what there was there. So I says, "Let's land on her, Jim." But Jim was dead against it at first. He says, "I don't want to go foolin' long no rack. We's doin' blame well, and we better let blame well alone, as de good book says, like as not days a watchman on dat rack." "Watchman your grandmother," I says. "There ain't nothing to watch but the Texas and the pilot house. And do you reckon anybody's going to risk his life for a Texas and a pilot house such a night as this, when it's likely to break up and wash off down the river any minute?" Jim couldn't say nothing to that, so he didn't try. "And besides," I says, "we might borrow something worth having out of the captain's stateroom. Seegers, I bet you, and cost 5 cents apiece, solid cash. Steamboat captains is always rich and get $60 a month, and they don't care a cent what a thing costs, long as they want it." Stick a candle in your pocket. I can't rest, Jim, till we give her a rummaging. Do you reckon Tom Sawyer would ever go by this thing? Not for pie, he wouldn't. He'd call it an adventure, that's what he'd call it, and he'd land on that wreck if it was his last act. And wouldn't he throw style into it? Wouldn't he spread himself, nor nothing? Why, you'd think it was Christopher Columbus discovering Kingdom Come. I wish Tom Sawyer was here. Jim, he grumbled a little, but give in. He said we mustn't talk any more than we could help, and then talk mighty low. The lightning showed us the wreck again just in time, and we fetched the stabboard derrick and made fast there. The deck was high out here. We went sneaking down the slope of it to labboard, in the dark, towards the Texas, feeling our way slow with our feet and spreading our hands out to fend off the guys, for it was so dark we couldn't see no sign of them. Pretty soon, we struck the forward end of the skylight and clumb onto it, and the next step fetched us in front of the captain's door, which was open, and by Jiminy, away down through the Texas Hall we see a light. And all in the same second we seem to hear low voices in yonder. Jim whispered and said he was feeling powerful sick and told me to come along. I says, all right, and was going to start for the raft. But just then I heard a voice wail out and say, "Oh, please don't, boys. I swear I won't ever tell." Another voice said, pretty loud, "It's a lie, Jim Turner. You've acted this way before. You always want more'n your share of the truck, and you've always got it too, because you've swore if you didn't you, tell. But this time you've said it just one time too many. You're the meanest, treacherousest hound in this country." By this time, Jim was gone for the raft. I was just a-biling with curiosity, and I says to myself, Tom Sawyer wouldn't back out now, and so I won't either. I'm going to see what's going on here. So I dropped on my hands and knees in the little passage, and crept aft in the dark till there warn't but one stateroom betwixt me and the cross hall of the Texas. Then in there I see a man stretched on the floor and tied hand and foot, and two men standing over him, and one of them had a dim lantern in his hand, and the other one had a pistol. This one kept pointing the pistol at the man's head on the floor, and saying, "I'd like to, and I order too, a mean skunk." The man on the floor would shrivel up and say, "Oh, please don't, Bill. I hain't ever goin' to tell." And every time he said that the man with the lantern would laugh and say, "Deed you ain't, you never said no truer thing and that, you bet you." And once he said, "Hear him beg, and yit if we hadn't got the best of him and tied him he'd a killed us both. And what for? Just for nothin'. Just because we stood on our rights, that's what for." But I lay you ain't a-goin' to threaten nobody any more, Jim Turner. Put up that pistol, Bill. Bill says, "I don't want to, Jake Packard. I'm for killin' him, and didn't he kill old Hatfield just the same way, and don't he deserve it? But I do want him killed, and I've got my reasons for it." "Bless yo' heart for them words, Jake Packard. I'll never forgit you long's I live," says the man on the floor, sort of blubbering. Packard didn't take no notice of that, but hung up his lantern on a nail and started towards where I was there in the dark, and motioned Bill to come. I crawfished as fast as I could about 2 yards, but the boat slanted so that I couldn't make very good time. So to keep from getting run over and catched, I crawled into a stateroom on the upper side. The man came a-pawing along in the dark, and when Packard got to my stateroom, he says, "Here, come in here." And in he come, and Bill after him. But before they got in, I was up in the upper berth, cornered and sorry I come. Then they stood there, with their hands on the ledge of the berth, and talked. I couldn't see them, but I could tell where they was by the whiskey they'd been having. I was glad I didn't drink whiskey, but it wouldn't made much difference anyway, because most of the time they couldn't a treed me because I didn't breathe. I was too scared. And besides, a body couldn't breathe and hear such talk. They talked low and earnest. Bill wanted to kill Turner. He said he'll tell, and he will. If we was to give both our shares to him now, it wouldn't make no difference after the row and the way we've served him. Sure's you're born, he'll turn state's evidence. Now you hear me. I'm for putting him out of his troubles. Some I, says Packard very quiet. Blame it, I'd sorter begun to think you was. Well then, that's all right. Liz go and do it. Hold on a minute, I hain't had my say yit. You listen to me. Shooting's good, but there's quieter ways if the thing's got to be done. But what I say is this. It ain't good sense to go courtin' around after a halter if you can get at what you're up to in some way that's just as good and at the same time don't bring you into no risks. Ain't that so? You bet it is, but how you goin' to manage it this time? Well, my idea is this. We'll rustle around and gather up whatever pickin's we've overlooked in the staterooms and shove for shore and hide the truck. Then we'll wait. Now I say it ain't goin' to be more'n 2 hours befo' this wrack breaks up and washes off down the river. See, he'll be drownded and won't have nobody to blame for it but his own self. I reckon that's a considerable sight better 'en killin' of him. I'm unfavorable to killin' a man as long as you can get around it. It ain't good sense, it ain't good morals. Ain't I right? Yes, I reckon you are, but s'pose she do break up and wash off. Well, we can wait the 2 hours anyway and see, can't we? All right then, come along. So they started, and I lit out, all in a cold sweat, and scrambled forward. It was dark as pitch there, but I said in a kind of a coarse whisper, "Jim?" And he answered up, right at my elbow with a sort of a moan, and I says, "Quick, Jim, it ain't no time for fooling around and moaning. There's a gang of murderers in yonder. And if we don't hunt up their boat and set her drifting down the river so these fellows can't get away from the wreck, there's one of 'em going to be in a bad fix. But if we find their boat, we can put all of 'em in a bad fix, for the sheriff'll get 'em. Quick, hurry. I'll hunt the labboard side, you hunt the stabboard. You start at the raft, and... Oh, my lordy, raft. Dey ain't no raft no mo. She done broke loose and gone I, and here we is. Chapter 13. Well, I catched my breath and most fainted. Shut up on a wreck with such a gang as that, but it warn't no time to be sentimentering. We'd got to find that boat now, had to have it for ourselves. So we went a-quaking and shaking down the stabboard side, and slow work it was, too, seemed a week before we got to the stern. No sign of a boat. Jim said he didn't believe he could go any further, so scared he hadn't hardly any strength left, he said. But I said, come on, if we get left on this wreck, we are in a fix, sure. So on we prowled again. We struck for the stern of the Texas, and found it, and then scrabbled along forwards on the skylight, hanging on from shutter to shutter, for the edge of the skylight was in the water. When we got pretty close to the cross-hall door, there was the skiff, sure enough. I could just barely see her. I felt ever so thankful. In another second, I would have been aboard of her, but just then the door opened. One of the men stuck his head out only about a couple of foot from me, and I thought I was gone. But he jerked it in again and says, "Heave that blame lantern out o' sight, Bill." He flung a bag of something into the boat, and then got in himself and sat down. It was Packard. Then Bill, he come out and got in. Packard says, in a low voice, "All ready, shove off." I couldn't hardly hang on to the shutters, I was so weak. But Bill says, "Hold on, do you go through him?" "And no, didn't you?" "No, so he's got his share o' the cash yet." "Well then, come along. No use to take truck and leave money." "Say, won't he suspicion what we're up to?" "Maybe he won't, but we got to have it anyway. Come along." So they got out and went in. The door slammed to because it was on the careened side, and in a half-second I was in the boat, and Jim come tumbling after me. I out with my knife and cut the rope, and away we went. We didn't touch an oar, and we didn't speak nor whisper, nor hardly even breathe. We went gliding swift along, dead silent, past the tip of the paddle box and past the stern. Then in a second or two more we was 100 yards below the wreck, and the darkness soaked her up, every last sign of her, and we was safe and knowed it. When we was 300 or 400 yards downstream, we see the lantern show like a little spark at the Texas door for a second, and we knowed by that the rascals had missed their boat, and was beginning to understand that they was in just as much trouble now as Jim Turner was. Then Jim manned the oars, and we took out after our raft. Now was the first time that I begun to worry about the men. I reckon I hadn't had time to before. I begun to think how dreadful it was, even for murderers, to be in such a fix. I says to myself, there ain't no telling but I might come to be a murderer myself yet, and then how would I like it? So says I to Jim, "The first light we see will land 100 yards below it or above it, in a place where it's a good hiding place for you and the skiff. And then I'll go and fix up some kind of a yarn, and get somebody to go for that gang and get them out of their scrape, so they can be hung when their time comes." But that idea was a failure, for pretty soon it begun to storm again, and this time worse than ever. The rain poured down, and never a light showed, everybody in bed, I reckon. We boomed along down the river, watching for lights and watching for our raft. After a long time the rain let up, but the clouds stayed, and the lightning kept whimpering, and by a flash showed us a black thing ahead, floating, and we made for it. It was the raft, and mighty glad was we to get aboard of it again. We seen a light now away down to the right on shore, so I said I would go for it. The skiff was half full of plunder, which that gang had stole there on the wreck. We hustled it on to the raft in a pile, and I told Jim to float along down, and show a light when he judged he had gone about 2 miles, and keep it burning till I come. Then I manned my oars and shoved for the light. As I got down towards it, 3 or 4 more showed, up on a hillside. It was a village. I closed in above the shore light and laid on my oars and floated. As I went by, I see it was a lantern hanging on the jackstaff of a double-hull ferry boat. I skimmed around for the watchman, a-wondering whereabouts he slept, and by I found him roosting on the bitts, forward, with his head down between his knees. I gave his shoulder 2 or 3 little shoves, and begun to cry. He stirred up in a kind of a startlish way, but when he see it was only me, he took a good gap and stretch, and then he says, "Hello, what's up? Don't cry, bub, what's the trouble?" I says, "Pap and ma'am and sis and—" Then I broke down. He says, "Oh, dang it now, don't take on so. We all has to have our troubles, and this'n'll come out all right. What's the matter with 'em?" There, are you the watchman of the boat?" "Yes," he says, kind of pretty well satisfied like. I'm the captain and the owner and the mate and the pilot and watchman and head deckhand, and sometimes I'm the freight and passengers. I ain't as rich as old Jim Hornback, and I can't be so blame, generous and good to Tom, Dick and Harry as what he is, and slam around money the way he does. But I've told him a many a time, I wouldn't trade places with him. For, says I, a sailor's life's the life for me, and I'm derned if I'd live 2 mile out o' town, where there ain't nothing ever goin' on, not for all his spondulics and as much more on top of it. Says I broke in and says, they're in an awful peck of trouble, and who is? Why, Pap and Mam and Sis and Miss Hooker, and if you take your ferry boat and go up there. Sup where are they? On the wreck. What wreck? Why, there ain't but ones. What, you don't mean the Walter Scott? Yes. Good land, what are they doin' there, for gracious sakes? Well, they didn't go there a purpose. I bet they did. Why, great goodness, there ain't no chance for 'em if they don't get off mighty quick. Why, how in the nation did they ever get into such a scrape? Easy enough. Miss Hooker was a visiting up there to the town. Yes, Booth's Landing, go on. She was a visiting there at Booth's Landing, and just in the edge of the evening she started over with her nigger woman in the horse ferry to stay all night at her friend's house. Miss what you may call her, I disremember her name. And they lost their steering oar and swung around and went a-floating down, stern first, about 2 mile, and saddle-bagsed on the wreck. And the ferryman and the nigger woman and the horses was all lost. But Miss Hooker, she made a grab and got aboard the wreck. Well, about an hour after dark, we come along down in our trading scow, and it was so dark we didn't notice the wreck till we was right on it, and so we saddle-bagsed. But all of us was saved but Bill Whipple, and oh, he was the best cretur. I most wished it had been me, I do. My George, it's the beatinest thing I ever struck. And then what did you all do? Well, we hollered and took on, but it's so wide there we couldn't make nobody hear. So Pap said somebody got to get ashore and get help somehow. I was the only one that could swim, so I made a dash for it. And Miss Hooker, she said if I didn't strike help sooner, come here and hunt up her uncle, and he'd fix the thing. I made the land about a mile below and been fooling along ever since, trying to get people to do something, but they said, what, in such a night and such a current? There ain't no sense in it, go for the steam ferry. Now if you'll go and. By Jackson, I'd like to, and blame it, I don't know but I will, but who in the dingnation's a-going to pay for it? Do you reckon your Pap? Why, that's all right. Miss Hooker, she told me, particular, that her Uncle Hornback. Great guns, is he her uncle? Looky here, you break for that light over yonder way and turn out west when you get there, and about 1/4 of a mile out you'll come to the tavern. Tell him to dart you out to Jim Hornback's, and he'll foot the bill. And don't you fool around any, because he'll want to know the news. Tell him I'll have his niece all safe before he can get to town. Hump yourself, now. I'm going up around the corner here to roust out my engineer. I struck for the light, but as soon as he turned the corner, I went back and got into my skiff and bilayed her out, and then pulled up shore in the easy water about 600 yards, and tucked myself in among some wood boats. For I couldn't rest easy till I could see the ferry boat start. But take it all around, I was feeling rather comfortable on accounts of taking all this trouble for that gang, for not many would 'a' done it. I wished the widow knowed about it. I judged she would be proud of me for helping these rapscallions, because rapscallions and dead beats is the kind the widow and good people takes the most interest in. Well, before long, here comes the wreck, dim and dusky, sliding along down. A kind of cold shiver went through me, and then I struck out for her. She was very deep, and I see in a minute there warn't much chance for anybody being alive in her. I pulled all around her and hollered a little, but there wasn't any answer, all dead still. I felt a little bit heavy-hearted about the gang, but not much, for I reckoned if they could stand it, I could. Then here comes the ferry boat, so I shoved for the middle of the river on a long downstream slant. And when I judged I was out of eye reach, I laid on my oars and looked back and see her go and smell around the wreck for Miss Hooker's remainders, because the captain would know her Uncle Hornback would want them. And then pretty soon the ferry boat give it up and went for the shore, and I laid into my work and went a-booming down the river. It did seem a powerful long time before Jim's light showed up, and when it did show, it looked like it was 1,000 miles off. By the time I got there, the sky was beginning to get a little gray in the east. So we struck for an island and hid the raft and sunk the skiff and turned in and slept like dead people. Chapter 14. By and by, when we got up, we turned over the truck the gang had stole off of the wreck and found boots and blankets and clothes and all sorts of other things, and a lot of books and a spyglass and 3 boxes of Seegers. We hadn't ever been this rich before in neither of our lives. The Seegers was prime. We laid off all the afternoon in the woods talking and me reading the books and having a general good time. I told Jim all about what happened inside the wreck and at the ferry boat, and I said these kinds of things was adventures. But he said he didn't want no more adventures. He said that when I went in the Texas and he crawled back to get on the raft and found her gone, he nearly died. Because he judged it was all up with him, any way it could be fixed. For if he didn't get saved, he would get drowned. And if he did get saved, whoever saved him would send him back home so as to get the reward, and then Miss Watson would sell him south, sure. Well, he was right. He was most always right. He had an uncommon level head for a nigger. I read considerable to Jim about kings and dukes and earls and such, and how gaudy they dressed, and how much style they put on, and called each other your majesty, and your grace, and your lordship, and so on, 'stead of Mr. And Jim's eyes bugged out, and he was interested. He says, I didn't know day was so many I hain't hearn 'bout none scasely, but ol' King Sollermun, onless you counts dem king's dats in a pack K yards. How much do a king get? Get, I says. Why, they get $1,000 a month if they want it. They can have just as much as they want. Everything belongs to them. Ain't dat gay? And what dey got to do, Huck? They don't do nothing. Why, how you talk, they just set around. No, is dat so? Of course it is. They just set around, except, maybe, when there's a war, then they go to the war. But other times they just lazy around, or go hawking, just hawking and SPSH. D you hear a noise. We skipped out and looked, but it warn't nothing but the flutter of a steamboat's wheel away down, coming around the point, so we come back. Yes, says I, and other times when things is dull, they fuss with the parliament, and if everybody don't go just so, he whacks their heads off. But mostly they hang round the harem. Round de which? Harem. What's de harem? The place where he keeps his wives. Don't you know about the harem? Solomon had one. He had about 1,000,000 wives. Why, yes, dat so. I done forgot it. A harem's a bawden house, I reckon. Mose likely day has rackety times in de nussery. En I reckon de wives quarrels concidable, en dat creased a racket. Yit dey say Solermund de wises, man dat ever live. I don't take no stock in dat. Becase why, would a wise man want to live in de mids, sich a blimblammin all de time? No, deed he wouldn't. A wise man take and bill a biler factory, and den he could shet down de biler factory when he want to raise. Well, but he was the wisest man anyway, because the widow she told me so, her own self. I don't care what de widder say, he warn't no wise man nother. He had some de dad fetchts ways I ever see. Does you know 'bout dat chili dat he gwin to chop in two? Yes, the widow told me all about it. Well den, warn dat de beaten's notion in de whirl. You jes' take and look at it a minute. Da's de stump, dat's one de women, he's you dat's de yuther one, I's Solermun, en dish your dollar bills de chili. Bof un you claims it. What does I do? Does I shin around, mongs, de neighbors, en find out which un you de bill do belong to, en han it over to de right one, all safe and sound, de way dat anybody dat had any gumption would. No, I take and whack de bill in two, en give half on it to you, en de yuther half to de yuther woman. Dat's de way Solermun was gwin to do wid de chili. Now I want to ask you, what's de use dat half a bill? Can't buy nothin' wid it. En what use is a half a chili? I wouldn't give a dern for a million But hang it, Jim, you've clean missed the point. Blame it, you've missed it 1,000 mile. Who's me, goes long. Don't talk to me 'bout yo pints. I reckon I knows sense when I sees it, en dey ain't no sense in sich doin' as dat. Dispute warn't 'bout a half a chili, dispute was 'bout a whole chili. En de man dat think he kin settle a 'spute 'bout a whole chili wid a half a chili don't know enough to come in outen de rain. Don't talk to me 'bout Solermun, Huck, I knows him by de back. But I tell you, you don't get the point. Blame de point, I reckon I knows what I knows. En mind you, de real pint is down furder, it's down deeper. It lays in de way Solermun was raised. You take a man dat's got ony one or two chillin', is dat man gwin to be wasteful o' chillin'? No, he ain't, he can't 'ford it. He know how to value 'em. But you take a man dat's got 'bout 5 million chillin' runnin' round a house, and it's diff'unt. He as soon chop a chili in two as a cat. Days plenty mo. A chili two, mo less, warn't no consequence to Solermun, dad fatch him. I never see such a nigger. If he got a notion in his head once, there warn't no getting it out again. He was the most down on Solomon of any nigger I ever see. So I went to talking about other kings, and let Solomon slide. I told about Louis XVI that got his head cut off in France long time ago, and about his little boy the dolphin, that would have been a king, but they took and shut him up in jail, and some say he died there. Po little chap. But some says he got out and got away, and come to America. Dat's good, but he'll be pooty lonesome. Dey ain't no kings here is dey, Huck. No. Den he can't get no situation. What he gwin to do? Well, I don't know. Some of them gets on the police, and some of them learns people how to talk French. Why, Huck, don't de French people talk de same way we does? No, Jim, you couldn't understand a word they said, not a single word. Well, now I be ding busted, how do dat come? I don't know, but it's so. I got some of their jabber out of a book. S'pose a man was to come to you and say Parlez-vous Franzy, what would you think? I wouldn't think nuffin'. I'd take and bust him over de head, dat is, if he warn't white. I wouldn't low no nigger to call me dat. Shucks, it ain't calling you anything. It's only saying, do you know how to talk French? Well den, why couldn't he say it? Why, he is saying it. That's a Frenchman's way of saying it. Well, it's a blame ridiclous way, and I don't want to hear no mo' about it. Dey ain't no sense in it. Looky here, Jim, does a cat talk like we do? No, a cat don't. Well, does a cow? No, a cow don't nuther. Does a cat talk like a cow, or a cow talk like a cat? No, dey don't. It's natural and right for 'em to talk different from each other, ain't it? Of course. And ain't it natural and right for a cat and a cow to talk different from us? Why, Mose, surely it is. Well then, why ain't it natural and right for a Frenchman to talk different from us? You answer me that. It is a cat a man, Huck. No. Well den, dey ain't no sense in a cat talkin' like a man. Is a cow a man, or is a cow a cat? No, she ain't either of them. Well den, she ain't got no business to talk like either one the uther of 'em. Is a Frenchman a man? Yes. Well den, dad blame it, why don't he talk like a man? You answer me dat. I see it warn't no use wasting words. You can't learn a nigger to argue. So I quit.